in his room they found a book, a notebook full of details of about the Harrier jump jet.
Welcome to Cold War Conversations.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
5, 2, 7, 1, 6, 6, 9, 8, 8, 3. This is Radio Star Czechoslovakia, the legitimate voice of occupied Czechoslovakia.
And I'm here to host this final program from the German Democratic Republic for you.
Harry served as a soldier in the British Intelligence Corps in Germany in the 1960s and 70s. His role was that of an intelligence and security operator focused on the identification of foreign and other malign activities which might undermine the effectiveness of the UK's military presence in the country. Accordingly, he had experience of a range of security investigations and close liaison with the West German civil and military security authorities. Now, I'm sure you are enjoying your weekly dose of Cold War history and you would like to continue to do so. So I'm asking if you wouldn't mind supporting us by paying at least $3 a month. Higher amounts are welcome too, but it's very straightforward and you can stop whenever you want. Plus, monthly supporters get the marvellous Cold War Conversations coaster too. Just go to coldwarconversations.com/donate. You can also help the podcast by leaving written reviews in Apple, as well as sharing us on social media. So, back to today's episode. Harry and I talk in detail about his service using the new wireless microphones kindly paid for by our financial supporters. We welcome Harry to our Cold War conversation.
I got to meet a number of the guys from the Int Corps guys who were in the local counterintelligence company. They used to come and visit as usual. And I got chatting with them and they said to me, why did you come and transfer? And I said, well, I did initially want to join the intelligence corps when I first joined the army. Well, initially I wanted to join the military police, but they wouldn't let me. They said, because you're wearing glasses and, you don't meet the standards. So I said, okay, well, what's the alternative? And intelligence corps was one of them. And they looked up a book and said, well, sorry, but the standards for the eyesight are the same as for the RMP. So you wouldn't be able to join that either. So I thought, couldn't do it. I only found out many, many years later that they'd actually been consulting a book that was about 10 years out of date. And I would have been able to join. But, I didn't. So I joined that's when I joined the Camerons instead. And, so anyway, they got talking and they said, no, there's no problem about glasses in the corps. So I said, well, sounds interesting. And I went down for an interview in Dusseldorf, at the headquarters of the local company, which was for CI company, as it was then, counterintelligence company. And I met the company commander, a smashing guy called Dimmy Dimmock. He was Maltese. Been in the Int Corps since 1941 and got an MC, he's a smashing old guy. And we got on very well. And he said, yeah, well, I'll recommend you for acceptance. So I put my application in and it went through. And he said, well, before you actually transfer, he said, you better come and do a month with us attached to the company. So I said, fine. So I went down and spent a month down there in Dusseldorf. It's supposed to be a month, but as it happened, the chief clerk was taken ill and they didn't have a chief clerk. So he said to me, well, you can do military clerical work and everything, because I've done the sort of thing with when I was doing the various jobs in the battalion. I stayed doing that for about 3 or 4 months, wasn't it? Fran was still in married quarters up in Osnabrück. We had two boys by then. And so she was up there looking after them, and I was commuting from Dusseldorf every week. And then they said, okay, fine, we've got a course starting at Ashford. And I went over to Ashford, did my course, was accepted into the Corps, and that was it, transferred.
Right. And the counterintelligence in the British Army of the Rhine in the mid-1960s, that's trying to counter Soviets, that was the main thing. It was, there were two sides of it, really. There was the protective security, and then there was the investigative stuff, investigating thefts and losses of weapons and ammunition and classified material and that sort of thing. My first posting was back to 4 Company. Dimmy Dimmer specifically asked for me to come back to the company. And so I was posted to Dusseldorf. We were in a little hutted camp called Rhine Center, which was right on the North Park in Dusseldorf. A nice little place. There were just ourselves and the BSSO, which is the British Services Security Organisation. That was basically, I suppose, it was an offshoot of MI6 with a few MI5 people attached to it. So we were there. They were in the next building to us. And my first job was, I was desk officer for protective security. We had 5 sections, in 4 Company. Number 1 section was based in Belgium at Robendonk at the advanced base. Number 2 section was in Dusseldorf. Number 3 section was in Munster. Number 4 section was in Dortmund, and number 5 section was in Rhein-Dahlem, which was the headquarters of British Army of the Rhine. Each of those sections, they had the job of carrying out protective security surveys and inspections. There was a rolling program of these, and so that every unit in BAR had a security survey every 3 years, every 2 years, 3 years, I can't remember now. And in the intervening years, they had a security inspection, which was a sort of a shorter version of that. And they would submit the report to us at headquarters, and my job was to go through them and sort of correct the spelling and the grammatical errors. But of course, we never had any of those with the intelligence corps. And also to make sure that the report stood up, that the recommendations matched the faults that had been identified. And so on. What sort of faults would you be identifying there?
All sorts of things like physical faults, like a building hadn't been constructed to, an armory hadn't been constructed to the correct standards. Ridiculous things. We had one which for years had passed inspection because there were supposed to be steel plates over the windows of the armory, and in fact, they actually turned out to be made of pressed asbestos, but they'd been painted steel battles through grey, and if you knocked on them, they sounded metallic. But one of our NCOs was a little bit more enthusiastic than the rest, took an auger to it and was able to drill a hole right through. So, silly things like that were found, and mishandling of keys and procedure for securing classified documents, because documents were classified in various grades: restricted, confidential, secret, and top secret, with sort of levels of security differing for each one. And we had to make sure that all the documents were being handled correctly, and all the documents were actually, in fact, there that should be there. You had silly things like that. Things like I remember one that I did later on, was actually in a YMCA, would you believe, a sweetened tobacco stall basically run by the YMCA. But because it was attached, they were given a document about the emergency plans in the event of Soviet invasion, where you go and where you hide and that sort of thing. And this was classified confidential, which is, not a vastly important thing, but it nevertheless was supposed to be held under secure conditions. And I had to go and do a routine check on this place. And I said, where do you keep your emergency plans? Oh, she was here, and pulled out the drawer and showed me the copy. So, everything from that up to the fact somebody losing a top secret file. And then you'd have to go into full investigative mode and start tracking down what had happened to it and where it had gone. I had one top secret investigation later on when I was in Plymouth, but mostly, it was just minor faults. And our procedure was that we were there to help the units. The RAF, for example, I worked quite a lot with the RAF, Bravo and Security Services, and their procedure at that time was police style. They would go in and they would virtually bang somebody up. If they had a document, they'd go in and they'd pretend to be in the Salvation Army and they'd try and swipe somebody's classified documents. Later on, we had the first wing of the RAF regiment that had been formed since days of Cyprus. They were sent over to act in an infantry role, and they happened to be based in the area that I was covering. And I went down to introduce myself, and there was absolute panic that, somebody from the security team had come to visit them. And I said, no, hang on, we don't do it that way. We're here to help you. And that was our procedure right the way through. We were there to guide people and advise them, not to get them punished or anything, just to make sure it didn't happen again. And that was actually probably not so good a thing for me to do, because with the RAF from that moment on, they'd ring me up at 3:00 in the morning to say that they'd mislaid one round of 9mm ammunition, but anyway, that was all. But come back to Germany, as I say, we had security surveys. They were the detailed ones, and then inspections of the intervening years, which were slightly less in detail. We also, of course, we were responsible for the vetting of civilian employees, which involved liaising with the German police, with it's into the car 14K, which was German equivalent special branch. And we had to liaise with them and check people's records before they were employed, and counter-sabotage surveys on sensitive sites and places like that.
And with the civilian employees, for example, I mean, did you what would have been the grounds for rejection there?
Well, any connection really with East Germany, or the communist family connections with East Germany, criminal records to a certain extent. Obviously, you couldn't stop somebody's traffic offences, but criminal records they were checked out, and they would be grounds for non-employment.
Right, and any left-wing affiliations?
Well, yeah, but we wouldn't have records of that, but we used to check that out with the German authorities, the LFE, which is the Landesamt für Verfassungsschutz, and the Bundesamt für Verfassungsschutz, that's the federal land and federal offices for the protection of the Constitution, which is the German equivalent of MI5 in the security service. And their records were kept. And we also liaised, of course, with the MAD, which is the German equivalent of our intelligence corps, and of course with the German civil police. We had very good relations with the German civil police.
And did you find any evidence of any? weirdness, or was it just really cock-ups most of the time, or people not being careful enough with security?
On the security side, it was mostly cock-ups.
Yeah.
I mean, security regulations can be awkward at times and oppressive. Our main problem, in fact, was we're having battles with the safety people, the fire services. For example, we had one of the gunner regiments was equipped with rapier, which at the air defence, which at that time was very, very highly classified, and so we had to go around and do surveys on the regiment bases and the garages in place where all the missiles and the trailers and the control equipment was all stored. And so our attitude was this has got to be made secure, so it had to be locked up and the keys were. And of course the fire services were going around saying, no, it's got to be left open and the keys have got to be immediately available. And so that was a thing. There was always a problem. We had to argue it out with the powers that be as to which was more important, safety or security at that time. Some of them were never resolved.
Yeah. No, I can imagine. Did you have any involvement with Socksmiths?
Well, I personally didn't, because we had a detachment. Their full-time job was chasing after Socksmiths. But we all knew about Socksmiths and we all knew what we had to do. And we had to go around and do security lectures to various units. And Socksmiths was part of the subject we had to cover. We had to tell them what it was and what they did and what their job was to do if they spotted a Socksmiths vehicle. We were much kinder to Socksmiths than Socksmiths were to Bricksmiths.
So I understand from some of the Bricksmiths guys.
That's right,
that I've spoken to. But it's interesting because Socksmiths is a relatively unknown part of the Cold War, as is Bricksmiths to some degree, but Socksmiths to an even greater degree.
Yeah, well, every soldier in BOR was issued with a card telling them what Socksmiths was and showing the plate markings on the vehicles and telling what they had to do if they spotted it, had to be reported immediately. And there were teams of military police who used to chase them around in marked cars, and there were our people who used to follow them around in unmarked cars. And one of the other jobs that we had was escorting the missiles which came in at Antwerp and were picked up by at that time it was the Royal Malta Artillery, which, despite its name, was an actual regiment of the British Army. But it was a transport regiment by this time. They no longer were gunners. And they were based in Mulheim. And their job was to go and pick up the missiles and drive them through into Germany for delivery to the various missile units. And
what, these were conventional missiles?
Yes.
Right.
Well, they did have nuclear capability, but moving the nuclear part of it was a different thing altogether. But part of one of our jobs was to go and escort the convoys in civilianized cars. The military police were there in their Land Rovers or Jeeps, Champs as it was then, and we'd be buzzing around in Volkswagens with BFG plates on them, standing out a mile. But the interesting thing was that the Malta Artillery were smashing guys, but they had absolutely no idea of security or what they were driving, because they'd come to a crossroads and the convoy would split and they'd go in 4 different directions. And of course the military police would be shooting off in 2 directions trying to find them. And we'd have to go and try and round up the ones that had gone in the 3rd direction. And we'd drive up alongside in a civilianized car, albeit with BFG plates on, and sort of hang out the window and wave them down. And the guy would stop and say, "What's the matter?" We'd say, "Follow us." and we'd take them, and they'd turn around and follow us, and we could have led them into East Germany, but they'd follow us, and we'd help reunite them with the convoy. But that was a fun job, that.
And you mentioned the anti-sabotage prevention. So were you sort of, this was against like Spetsnaz units or?
Yeah, again, when you do counter-sabotage, you have to put yourself in the mind of somebody who's coming to sabotage the place and look at all the vulnerable parts of it and recommend what you can to make those vulnerable parts less vulnerable. And again, that was something I did later on. But while we were in Germany, there were various things. There was various missile storage sites and nuclear storage sites which were had permanent military armed guard on them. And I remember we had one, and the unit that was doing the guards had taken detectors, detecting equipment, and put it out all round. And mad panic on one occasion because one of these went off. They went to find it, and it had been stolen. And we eventually got the guy who'd done it, and it was an 18-year-old kid who'd found this thing sort of lying beside in a ditch. And he thought, oh, that's interesting. He picked it up and taken it home with him.
So what was this, like a motion detector or something?
Yeah.
Right, okay.
That got quite a bit of a stir at the time. We had half of the police in Germany out looking for it.
Right.
But...
Right, and because this was before the Red Army faction or any of those activities.
Yes, it was. Yeah, it was. That sort of came later on in the thing.
Yeah. Okay, and you mentioned working on some a top secret case in Plymouth.
Yeah. We from after Dusseldorf, we moved to Plymouth, 24 Brigade, which was an air portable brigade. They were the first, the spearhead units. I was a sergeant in charge of the counter-intelligence detachment. The brigade went across to Denmark on exercise, and I should have gone with them, but I had an attack of kidney stones, and I was in the hospital at the time they went. So I spent a few days in the hospital, and I came out, I was okay again. And when the brigade came back, about 3-4 weeks after they came back, we had a big check on all the classified documents and everything. And lo and behold, there was a top secret document missing. And I had the job of tracking it down. And eventually I managed to track it down, and we recovered it. It had been left in one of the brigade headquarter locations in Denmark. Well, we knew who'd done it, but it was brushed under the carpet, and not by me. I said, "Well, look, this is a top secret document. This is compromised. All the material in it, is now got to be compromised, classed as, being available to the enemy." And we had quite a standoff. The brigade staff were not happy because it was one of them that had left it there. And I was reporting, so I had to report to them. And I said, well, look, this has got to be reported because it's a top secret document which has been compromised. So all the material in it has got to be changed and everything. And there was a certain standoff between myself and the brigade staff, and I got a rather nasty annual report out of it. And the interesting thing is, actually, only about 6 months ago, I got all my confidential reports from my entire service, and this is reminding me of this. There's this report saying I was, how dare I say this? Fortunately, because of the people who were writing my confidential report at that time were not intelligence corps, there had to be part 3 of my confidential report had to be written by an intelligence corps officer who happened to be the senior in Corps officer in Southern Command. So he knew what was happening on my side. And so he wrote a bit which cancelled out all the bad things, which, had they stood, would have virtually finished my career at that point. But the person who was careless with the document never received any sanction at all, as far as I'm aware. We got the document back, and they said, "Oh, we got it back and go back in there."
Wow. So what did they do? Leave it in a drawer somewhere, or
worse than that, they left it out, just lying on a desk. And to make it even worse, was the place that they'd left it in, which had been the brigade headquarters for a period during the exercise, had subsequently been used as a transit lounge for troops of all other nationalities involved in the exercise. And, so, I mean, God knows how many hundreds of people could have been sitting there bored to tears and see this line there. Oh, we'll have a look through this.
And presumably it said top secret on the top.
Big red crosses on it.
Well, you'd absolutely open that and have a look at it, wouldn't you?
Absolutely. But, as I say, things were, hopefully it wouldn't happen now.
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, I've read and speaking to the Bricksmiths guys as well. Obviously, a lot of the ways they got their intelligence was by going through rubbish dumps and just stuff that just got left behind.
Yep, absolutely.
I know you weren't directly involved with Socksmiths, but do you know if Socksmiths were ever caught doing that or trying?
Trying to. I don't know whether they were actually caught at it. But they certainly they were stopped on many, many occasions, just as Bricksmiths were. But as I say, we were not allowed to use firearms or anything. But we were troops were advised to sort of block them in with vehicles, and that happened on lots of occasions. There was big excitement for a squaddy to find a Socksmith's car.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it seems there were loads of squaddies who never ever saw one.
Well, there was a big area. There weren't all that many of them. I don't know how many Socksmiths cars there were, but.
So when you're back in Dortmund, this is.
Then from there we moved on, came back to Plymouth, and then posted to Dortmund. Yeah.
Right, and there you're working in the Ruhr. And was that similar work to what you were doing before? Same
sort of thing, except that, whereas in Dusseldorf I'd been based at the headquarters and checking other people's reports, I was now out in the field commanding a team producing those reports. So I was involved in doing the protective security surveys and security investigations and that sort of thing, and vetting. We had a big MSO. The MSO is the Mixed Services Organization. This was a civilianized teams of laborers, drivers, general, they were Eastern European, East Germans, refugees, everything, all recruited, all wore green uniforms, and they were all under the British Army, and we had all the jobs to do with vetting and investigating. We had all sorts of strange investigations with them. I remember we had one where a guy had died, and he'd been lying in his room for a few days before they realized he wasn't around anymore because he was supposed to be on leave. And anyway, when they finally broke his door open, he was there, but he had quite a considerable amount of money tucked away under his mattress. And of course, there was a big concern about how he got it, what he'd been doing that could possibly be of value to somebody else. It turned out he'd just been hoarding it. He'd never spent anything on himself. He never had no clothing of his own other than what was issued to him, and no possessions, and all his money was just being squirreled away.
You mentioned you were employing East Germans in this.
Yeah, the refugees,
Right. And
provided they got through the vetting, the initial vetting procedure.
Okay.
There was nothing known against them. Then, as they were refugees, then they would, they were allowed to join the MSO.
Yeah. Because that's obviously one of the classic ways that they used to infiltrate people into the West was posing as a refugee.
That's right. But the MSO, of course, they did the jobs that the local West Germans thought were beneath them. Cleaners, drivers, labourers, that sort of thing.
Mm. But valuable roles if somebody's going to leave a top secret document on a desk for however long.
Yeah.
So, okay. In your time with military intelligence, I mean, what was there anything where you thought, I just do not believe that's happened, or anything that was sort of like you particularly remember because it was so odd or unbelievable?
I'll tell you one, but you won't be able to use it. We had one of the units, which was a 100% vetted unit, and one of their guys went absent. Well, two of the guys went absent. And we had a whisper that one of them had been involved with a girl who was tied in with one of the anti-nuclear crowd. And so we actually had to show an interest in it. And eventually they came back. And we hauled them in for interview. And this particular guy, we were had him in for a chat. It turned out there was no security implication in it because he hadn't been with the girl, and they'd just gone off on the lash instead. But he did admit that he was a cook, and that he and a fellow cook used to into the porridge. And I had the job of telling his commanding officer this. And I remember he was a very sort of florid-faced chap. And I told him this, and he literally blanched, and the colour drained from his face. You could see a line of white going down his face. And he sat down and he called, Julian, get in here quickly. And the adjutant came running. Yes, Colonel, what's that? He said, this chap here, he never worked in the mess, did he? But as I say, that probably won't go in.
Well, that is pretty. Yeah, I mean that was one I wasn't expecting there.
But no, but that was one of the things that stuck with me.
Were there situations where, like this one, where the soldier was allegedly having a relationship with an anti-nuclear protester, but somebody who just went AWOL, and you were concerned? Well,
we were concerned because of this relationship that we heard that he had.
Yeah.
Because he was in a fully vetted unit where everybody in the unit had to be vetted because of the role. Obviously, we had to take an interest in absentees. I mean, there are always absentees, and you don't normally interest, but in that particular case, we were interested. We had another one where it was at the time that the Harrier jet was being introduced, and that, again, at the time was highly secret, the jump jet. A guy went on leave from one of the signal regiments. And while he was on leave, for some reason, they had cause to turn his room out. And in his room, they found a notebook full of details of about the Harrier jump jet, and they'd been on exercise with the Harriers only the week before he went on leave. So there was a little bit of a panic about that, and I called in my opposite number in the RAF PNSS, and he said, "Christ, we want to see him." So I put a word in with the regiment and said, look, as soon as he comes back, bang him up in the guard room, not speak to anybody, and call me immediately. And they duly did this, and I got dragged away from what should have been a very good social night. And so I went up and I called my opposite number from the RAF, and we went in, and it was his interview because the stuff was RAF information. And he gave this guy a really hard time. And it turned out he was just interested in aircraft, and he didn't know what he was writing down. So there was nothing in it from our side, but he didn't get punished for it. He was just spoken to severely and warned that he shouldn't go writing things down. But that was the nearest I came to an actual major investigation. We did have one case where we were asked to help a Scotland Yard Special Branch, and a couple of guys from the branch came out. They wanted to see a soldier from the Royal Irish Rangers, which was in our area. So we put them up and made the arrangement, took them round to do the interviews and everything. And again, we weren't involved in that side of it. But while they were staying with us, when they came out, they were introduced as both detective inspectors, and we put them up in our homes. Different guys in our section had one of them staying with each of them, and we took them out on the thrash down the town to go into the red light area and everything, and into the blue film pubs where all squaddies used to go. And they for coppers, they were amazingly naive. They'd never seen some of these things before. And anyway, we got talking, and it turned out that one of them was a DI, the other one was a detective constable. And the reason they both claimed to be DIs was because they, having worked with army units before, they'd found that they would be separated, and the DI would be in the officers' mess, and the DI, the DC or the DS would be sent either to sergeant's mess or into a bunkhouse somewhere. And so they decided they didn't want to. And of course, they were quite amazed that they were actually staying in people's homes with us.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I would say, unfortunately, that one, we never got the result of it because that was a branch case.
Right. Were there any cases of British troops crossing into East Germany?
Not in our area. We didn't have anything like that. When I was transferring into the Corps, it was at the time when Corporal Brian Patchett, he defected to East Germany. And I remember the 2IC and 4 company absolutely all walking around with distraught, saying, "My God, you know what? Member of the Corps, member of the Int Corps, has gone over. Oh God!"
So this was somebody from the intelligence
Corps.
You
can Google him. Brian Patchett is. I think he came back about 5 years ago, but this was in 1966 when he went across.
Wow. And he presumably knew reasonable amount of information that would have been useful to the East Germans.
Yeah, I think he was SIGINT.
Right. And what was his reason for crossing?
I can't remember now.
Okay, I'll look it up.
So you Google him, Brian Patchett, Patchett. He was
one of your own.
One of our own, yeah. As bad as Anthony Blunt.
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
We did have one or two.
Yeah. No, it's just interesting because I interviewed a American who crossed into East Germany via Austria when Austria was occupied by the Soviets, or part of it was occupied in the 50s. And it was quite interesting talking to him. And I'm aware there were other defections, but I'm not sure I'd heard of that one.
Yeah,
so,
it was a big thing at the time. Yeah.
I'll look that one up.
If you like what you're hearing, sign up to our email list at coldwarconversations.com. And we have further photos, videos and information on this episode in our show notes, which will show as a link in your podcast app.
Don't forget, if you'd like to get one of those Cold War Conversations coasters, help keep us on the air, then head over to coldwarconversations.com/donate. And if you can't wait for the next episode, do visit our Facebook discussion group where listeners just like you continue the Cold War conversation. Just search for Cold War Conversations in Facebook. Thank you very much for listening. It is really appreciated. Goodbye.